The next morning I groaned as I sat up. We had all crashed on my couch watching TV and hanging out, and I had definitely not gotten my full 8 hours, but the sun was out coming through the window waking me up. Stupid California sun. I looked around. Hiromi was curled up beside me. Rebecca looked like she had kicked Ichi in the face at some point in the night, as she looked like she was ready to fight ninjas in her sleep. Ichi was on the floor looking a little pitiful, and Malcolm had started on the floor and was happily drooling away. Using ninja reflexes to switch my leg that Hiromi had stolen with a pillow, I got up and stretched. I should get some breakfast for my chums. I headed around the room quietly, making sure not to make a single noise as I got ready, and then, while everyone was still sleeping, I slipped out. There was an okay food stall just down the street. I hit the ground level and walked out. The morning was busy. People heading to jobs. Heads down, beaten by the daily grind. I walked over to the food stall and slipped into the line. Yawning a bit as I felt sleepy, not something I usually had to deal with, but that was fine. A bit of more natural sleep every once in a while wasn't a bad thing. I passed over the eddies and started piling skewers of meat into my hands when I heard it. Gunfire. I looked up, as did everyone. 1 or 2 shots was normal, but full auto fire was unusual, especially this early in the morning. I could see tension rising, but no one started screaming or running off. They just hunched in on themselves and got on with their day. As the gunfire continued, I felt a frown growing on my face. Then I heard explosions, grenades if I was right. Something bigger than normal was going on. I took a bite of my meat skewer and chewed slowly. Oh well. I turned and headed back upstairs. Not bad. Rebecca offered as she chowed down on her breakfast after I woke everyone up. Not as good as the old lady that cooks around my place, but not bad. Nah, the old guy around my apartment has the best skewers. Malcolm denied, and I had to jump in with a scoff. No, the old guy around my old apartment had the best ones. I argued, and soon all of us were pointing out where the best meat skewer places were in Night City. There must be drugs in the skewers because everyone argued that the place nearest to them had the best ones. We were getting rowdy arguing when suddenly June popped out of his room. Already fully suited up in his tiger claw stuff. June? I asked, because it was unusual to see him dressed up this early in the morning. 6th Street just did a raid on one of our distributors. He offered as he hit the kitchen and grabbed a burrito, obviously for the road. Shit. Does that mean there's going to be another gang war? Ichi asked, and June stopped for a moment. Not sure, but we won't just let this one go. He looked at me. This is probably retribution for Yuto. He explained, and I frowned. 6th Street wouldn't react this strongly to just some gonk getting flatlined. Not unless they wanted an excuse to do this anyways. I'm going to call Wakako, I said, and June shrugged before heading out. Motoko? Just give me a second, Hiromi. Wakako will know what's going on. Actually, I'll send her a text, she might be busy. If there was a surprise attack, Wakako would definitely be busy handing out information. Motoko, I'd like any information on what is going on with 6th Street you can give me, Wakako. Attacking because of Yuto sounds wrong. I nodded as I sent it off, and I was about to bite into my meat stick when Wakako suddenly called. Wakako? 6th Street are claiming that the multiple dead killed by a Tiger Claw hired assassin are the cause of the attack. At least that is what their lieutenants are saying. Wakako dropped that on me for a second and I could feel my jaw drop. But I only killed Yuto? They are claiming multiple other deaths. I have a BD. I'm aware. Fujimura handed it over right away. I didn't see it myself, but it was checked over. I'm trying to confirm if the 2 men actually are dead, or are just being hidden as an excuse. You want work? I'll help. Good. I'll be in contact with your little fixer. The call ended and I rolled my eyes as Wakako still hadn't learned how to say goodbye. Motoko? 6th Street is retaliating. They are saying I killed some of their people, trying to frame me. I only killed Yuto and had a BD of it. Something is fishy. Wakako is going to give us some work. I looked around the room. I think we should get suited up. Ichi, Malcolm, and Hiromi nodded right away, but I saw Rebecca looking a little blank at the whole thing. But then she firmed up. No fucking way we just let them blame us for shit. She decided, and I smiled at her. Everyone got moving soon after and we started gearing up. Overdressed? Wakako asked me and I scoffed at her. Not with this shit happening. Do as you like. Here. She threw a shard at me, but her words stopped me from slotting it. That's the delivery item. Meet up with Muammar Reyes, a fixer in Santo Domingo. Sure. Anything else? Answer any questions he has. It's a copy of your PD. Wakako offered and I blinked looking at the shard. Letting him see what happens so he can pass the information on? I asked, breaking down what was happening. Exactly. He might request some assistance, that'll be up to you, but he doesn't want a gang war any more than I do. Understood. I'll see what he needs. Good. Motoko. Wakako said as I made to turn away. 6th Street likely already knows you were involved yesterday. Your information has been spreading for some time. Be careful on the drive through. Perhaps take another vehicle. Understood. Thanks, Wakako. She scoffed, but to my surprise spoke again. Hayato has enjoyed having a friend. The girl is pressured to act a certain way because of her status. Thank you. Honestly, it felt more awkward to be thanked than anything else. It was like the hairs on the back of my neck were rising up, which was impossible since my neural link covered the entire back of my neck. She glared at me suddenly. Don't look at me like a scared cat. Get out of here. Yep. I agreed and quickly ran away. Time to get back to work. Rebecca was driving. We had all piled into her truck as I took Wakako's advice seriously. Since Rebecca's truck was the newest, it would have the least connection to Section 9. I had even swapped out my helmet, and was just wearing my net goggles to hide my eyes as we drove through Rancho Coronado onto an overlook. That was apparently where Muammar Reyes the fixer hung out. I vaguely remembered this was where you could find him in the game too. So I guess it was just his favorite spot. Rebecca pulled off the road and onto the sidewalk as she slowed to a stop, and I stepped out. Ho? A whole group coming to meet El Capitan? The man with the goofiest haircut I've seen in a while called out as I approached. Delivery from Wakako. Mr. Reyes. I informed him professionally as I held out the shard. The guy blinked a bit, seemingly surprised at my courtesy before he just huffed and took it. Interestingly, he didn't check it himself, but passed it off to a woman that was in his car who promptly put on a BD wreath and started watching. So, you're the real hot shot that caused that trouble yesterday. I only completed the job I was hired for. Yeah, well, you are shaking up a real hornet's nest. Offing 4 6th Street ganggoons is really increasing tensions. I only killed one person, Yuto, and he isn't 6th Street. That BD will prove that. He looked over at the woman before looking back at me. If you say so. Then he crossed his arms and reset back against the side of his car and seemed content to just wait. Hiromi joined me and threw me a raised eyebrow, but I just shrugged at her. Not sure what Reyes was playing at. Finally, not long after the woman took off the BD. Reyes glanced to us and then leaned into his car, where the two started talking quietly. I didn't bother to listen in, and not long after he stood up. Well, unless you somehow managed to fake a BD, you're right. Damn it. He cursed as he took the BD and tossed it to me. Wakako said you'd be interested in a gig to help out with this. He spoke and I nodded. That's right, I need to put this into the hands of some people that can do something about it. I'll need some guards, and... well, frankly, I can't promise you'll be safe, but if you can explain it'll help. I was about to accept it offhand before I stopped. Motoko? Hiromi asked, but I stayed quiet. I'm not Tiger Claw, and frankly, this entire situation isn't my problem. I did a gig, I got paid. Problem is over. I offered, and Hiromi looked surprised before she slowly nodded, raising her dark chromed fingers up to her lips as she tapped them. You are right. If someone wants to cause a war between the TC and 6th Street, it's not any of our business. She replied, and I nodded as she realized the same thing I had. We could walk away. It was obvious Muammar Reyes the Fixer was going to speak to someone big in 6th Street. That could easily lead to a shootout, but for what? I doubt the guy was going to pay us anywhere near what such a thing should be worth. So was I supposed to do this pro bono? Hiromi hounded me about getting paid for things. This was one of those situations. Tiger Claws had tried to kidnap me, why should I do my best to keep a war from starting? I mean, I would always worry about June, but I was a merc. War would be good for business if I was willing to be mercenary about it. There is something you're maybe forgetting. Ichi whispered as he approached from behind. If 6th Street believes you were responsible for the deaths, then you'll be a target. He added, and I grumbled, and even Hiromi nodded at me. Fine. Hiromi, talk to Mr. Reyes, figure out how much this is going to cost him. On it. Ichi, Malcolm. Just keep an eye out. We are still in 6th Street territory. I added, and both boys nodded. I turned to Rebecca and just threw her a thumbs up, because Rebecca was looking fucking Nova, her arm up on the window of her truck, a big pair of mirrored shades on her face. She threw me a thumbs up back. 10 minutes later we were preparing. We would be working as a guard and offering intel to some member of 6th Street that was showing up. I stared down the road, until I noticed a trio of trucks with 6th Street tags heading our way. I glanced over. Rebecca was inside her truck, machine guns at the ready in case of any trouble. The others were spread around, while Hiromi stayed in the truck with Rebecca, and I stood beside El Capitan. I was still wearing my net gogs, hopefully they would give me enough time to speak before they just started firing when they saw me. The trucks pulled up and out came a half-dozen gangoons. All armed, but looking pretty calm, none of them seemed to care much about the fact me and my tunes were around. All right, then. You called us up here. What is it? The one who spoke wasn't anyone I recognized, and with a quick scan I realized who I was dealing with. Rick Morton stomped up. The man had the physicality of an ex-soldier. Old fatigues, with the red, white and blue, and his jacket had a large eagle on the shoulder. This was the general of 6th Street. The main man. The leader. I was standing in front of one of the most powerful people in the city, and he very likely thought I was the killer of some of his boys. Fucking El Capitan, when this was over, if I was still alive I was going to punch him in the dick. A little warning would have been nice. General. Good to see you are still healthy, I got some intel for you. Preem shit. The man continued to stomp over and glanced me over for a second. Thankfully his eyes refocused on Muammar instead. You better not be wasting my time. Talk to me. Me? Never, you know I don't waste time. I do real business. I heard about your little issues yesterday. Couple of your men killed in your own territory, Tiger Claw action was it? Get on with it, Muammar, I'm busy. Well, I got the real story of what happened. Straight from the source. He offered doing the one thing I wish he hadn't, patting me on the shoulder. A moment later guns were up, and I was staring down a man that would kill me without hesitation while I was in a suboptimal position. 2 dick punches, if I survived this. I slowly reached up and pulled the tech gogs up over my forehead so my eyes were clear, staring down the rather large Malorian overture that was pointed in my face. I didn't kill your men. I said firmly and clearly. The silence between the three of us carried on, even as his men continued to point guns at Itchy, Malcolm, and even Rebecca as things grew tense. Hey now, easy. Come on now, General, you know me. I wouldn't put you in this situation if this wasn't serious. Intel, remember? Muammar called out, hands raised at the angry 6th Street goons that were still very hostile. I hadn't actually expected it. The guy actually stepped in front of me, covering me here. Okay, I'll forgive the dick punches. Explain. Now. Rick demanded, but not to Muammar, but to me. I'm a merc. I was hired to take out Yuto, a Tiger Claw goon who kept trying to assassinate a member of the TC. Yesterday I tracked him down to a home in Rancho Coronado, and I took him out. Simple, clean. This morning I find out that somehow multiple 6th Street bodies were found. You saying that wasn't you? I'm saying I killed one person yesterday. Likely story. How about plain and clear evidence? I cut off as the man looked like his patience was ending. Muammar then came in, holding out the shard in his hand. She's right, General. This is? A copy of the BD that I scrolled yesterday. I scroll all of my gigs. Call it a hobby. I explained, and I could see behind the man's Kuroshi eyes that he was considering, did he want a war with the TC? If he did, killing all of us would give him what he wanted regardless. But I had to hope that the man wanted to know who had lied to him more, because he definitely didn't know that I hadn't killed his men. Carlos! He yelled, and a man ran up. Check this BD. The order was followed, and while guns didn't lower, everyone was more interested in what was going on as Carlos rushed the truck and settled in to check the BD. Our eyes never left, and I made sure to not show a hint of fear. I wasn't entirely confident I could grab the overture pointed at my face before he fired. Not even with my Sandy, he was the leader of 6th Street. No way he didn't have his own speedwear. But I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. A few minutes later, Carlos was out of the brain dance, and he hurried over. The general took a few steps back and Carlos whispered into his ear. I watched on as the man's face remained blank throughout, but when it was done he waved a hand, and all the guns suddenly dropped. I supposed he got what he wanted. Muammar, you confirm this? Got it direct from old Waikiko. He offered, waving at me. And this was you? It was. And the reason I shouldn't flatline you for coming onto my turf and committing a murder? Yuto was Tiger Claw, and someone in 6th Street was hiding him. Imagine what would have happened if on his third assassination attempt he succeeded. I countered with an arched eyebrow at the older man. If he wanted to play threatening games, I could too. Then the Tigers would get sent back to their fucking pachinko parlors in body bags. The general countered to some grumbled appreciation of the men behind him. And some of your men would have gone back to their family in the same. Because someone decided to play games. I don't know if you knew about this. I don't know if this was planned, but frankly, I don't care. I took a gig to kill a man, and I did it. I got paid. Gig over. But I didn't kill your people. I'm a professional. Yet my boys are dead. But not by my hand, and not by the Tigers. I argued back, and the men around us were frowning. Unhappy. And I'm supposed to take the word of some Asian kid, that it wasn't the Tigers? Don't believe your lying eyes? I asked, after a moment. That's not my problem then. I took the gig from Waikiko to deliver that shard, and I took the gig from Mr. Reyes to be his bodyguard and explain my side of what happened. If you don't want to listen, that's not my concern. You think you are above this? That I won't send men against you? He asked in turn, almost amused as he questioned me. I think that I've done everything I can to prove that I'm not your enemy, but if you want to waste men on killing some gonk kid while also starting a war with the Tigers, that's your choice. Just don't expect to get those men you send after me back in one piece. Things got quiet for a minute, and I could practically see the thoughts running through the general's head. "You got some balls, kid," he finally said as he came to a decision. "Don't usually see street rats your age pull off actual hits." Thinking about his words and the amused tone he said them in, I shrugged. Hiromi would be happy. I reached into my back pocket and wormed around a bit to find it. Managing to snag it even though the pocket was barely large enough for a finger, I pulled out a slightly rumpled business card. Section 9, is always looking for more business. I offered and handed the slightly rumpled card. There was a sense of confusion, but eventually General Morton took the card and flicked it over. It was still pretty fancy even though I've been sitting on it for a while and I think I ran it through a wash at least once. He showed it to Carlos, the guy he had sent to look at the BD, and both of them chuckled. "You're a funny one," he seemed to decide on, and then turned around. "Let's roll," he called out, and all the 6th Street goons rushed back to their cars and soon the cavalcade was on its way. "Well, I think that went well," El Capitan said, seemingly pleased, and I shrugged. "We aren't dead or in a firefight, so I guess so," I agreed, and he nodded as I seemed to get it. "I'm out of here too," I decided then. I was sort of done dealing with gang leaders today. My breath in my ears was all I could hear as I moved. Up and down, over and across. I raced across the city. Legs pumping, and arms pushing and pulling as no obstacle slowed me. I had felt constricted after everything. Between the Tiger's bullshit, and now 6th Street trying to frame me. So once everyone had split up, I had headed outside and just started running. I wasn't sure why I had selected athletics as my grind for the day, but maybe I hadn't. Maybe I just needed to get away. So I ran. Heading through the dense urban jungle with no direction in mind. I simply let parkour guide me over all obstacles. There were a lot of people I suddenly wanted to kill. I still needed to flatline the stupid old man that thought kidnapping me was acceptable. But I had told Wakako I would let it go. I needed to kill the gonk fuck that had tried to frame me for killing 6th Street gangoons. Not that I wouldn't have killed them, but I didn't like the fact it seemed planned. Someone had wanted a war between the two gangs, and had done a lot to set it up. Yuto. Then framing the merc that killed him. And I had to consider how much I wanted to get involved. I paused, breathing heavily, sweat streaming down my forehead as I leaned against a wall for a moment. So much trouble because some gonk wanted to kill another. So much trouble for something I didn't care about, and wasn't even involved with. I wiped my forehead and stalked around a bit, cooling down my muscles as I considered. I hadn't heard anything about the 6th Street and TC thing yet. I would have to stop by Wakako in the morning to find out if everything was back to normal, or if the TC were planning to retaliate back as well. This could easily turn into another gang war. I shook it off. It would become whatever it would become. Wandering over to a few SCSMs, I started browning. I could use something to drink. "Hey Chica." A voice called out, grabbing my attention. A teenager was sauntering up to me. A few of his boys that had been sitting on a pile of tables in front of a small food place were sauntering up. "Never saw your chrome down this way before," he offered with a smile that made me realize he was trying to be charming. "Sorry, chum. Not interested," I offered clearly and went back to picking a drink. Uck. Most of these tasted like cough syrup. Stupid Cola. I'd kill for just a Coke, or a Dr. Pepper or something. "Hey, come on Herman, you are okay." He choked out. His reaching hand had grabbed my shoulder, so I grabbed his throat. With a shift of my hips, I slammed him into the SCSM I was looking through and held him in place. I decided on a grape Cola. Yuck, and fished out the drink as it came through, still holding the boy against the SCSM. He was scrabbling a bit, but I let him breathe at least. "I'm not interested, and don't touch me," I told him as I slammed my thumb through the top of the can and started drinking. Chugging it down, I crushed the can and forced it into his hand. "Throw that away for me, and next time take a no." Idly I noticed his boys were rushing over, but they weren't a threat. I shifted back, turned away and then leapt. Backflipping onto the SCSM, I let the force push me even higher and jumped upwards again. Hands reaching out and grabbing the guardrail of a street that ran over the area. With a quick flip, I was standing on the guardrail a dozen feet above the boys and looking down on them. I spun, and with a bounce of my ankles to start up, I started jogging up the rail. And out of sight, ignoring the calls of surprise from the teenaged boys. I leapt up, jumping nearly on top of a light pole that was lower than me, and hefted myself up. Then I took a few running steps and leapt. The street below me might be filled with cars, but for a moment I felt utterly alone in the entire city. Then I landed, slipped a little as the light poles weren't designed for people to run on then, and ended up spinning down the entire pole to keep myself from falling. I stepped off, and I realized I was actually in city center. Damn. That was a hell of a run. I looked around at the corpo suits that were staring at me in surprise as I had appeared from nowhere. Deciding I had run enough for now, I called for my kusanagi, and walked over to a bench and took a seat. What a day. Since I had nothing else to do, I went ahead and sent out some texts. Motoko, hey Wakako, you know how the 6th Street and Tiger Claw thing is going? I sent the text and sat back expecting to be waiting for a while, but Wakako responded back pretty quickly actually. Wakako, there has been a meeting called between bosses. Ceasefire has been called until that is over. You should avoid their territory, but neither side truly wishes for a conflict. Well done. Motoko, didn't do much. Wakako, you were targeted by a gang, and stood in front of the leader of that gang. You did much. Speak to Hayato in the morning. She was worried. I laughed at the last bit and couldn't help but respond. Motoko, are you trying to set up a playdate with your granddaughter? You know I didn't know she was your granddaughter. Wakako, I'm aware. It is why I allowed your continued contact. Don't disappoint me. I blinked because that was definitely a threat. I wisely dropped the conversation there. My bike pulled up a while later and I rose up, sliding onto the seat and throttling the engine. I grinned. It had been a while since I took my kusanagi out for a spin. I gunned the engine and let the front wheel kick a bit as I took off, quickly blurring into the traffic and enjoying the feeling of the motorcycle's cycling gears as I slipped through the city center traffic. I let my body act without thought as I weaved through traffic. I still felt like moving. I didn't head home. Instead, cycling up and heading north out of the corporate district and into Watson. Traffic got worse, but for once I wasn't following laws. I weaved in and out, jumping onto the sidewalk when I needed. I kept moving, ignoring the press of traffic around me. To my surprise, I got an alert. 100 reflex XP gained. That was handy, and I was smiling happily as I finally made it to a more open area. My engine whined and roared as I raced through the emptier streets of Northside. Up and down ramps, through mostly empty streets. I just felt constricted and irritated. I finally slowed and parked on the side of a road overlooking the area. Neon lights in the distance, and farther city central in the far distance, sending lights into the night. It was Lucy that thought the lights looked like a prison. I scoffed as I stepped off the bike and jumped up onto the concrete barrier. This place didn't look like a prison to me. It looked like opportunity. The thought made me nod, and I nodded again as I realized it was the truth. Lazy. I was lazy, always had been. But it was time to get some shit sorted. I plotted as I looked over the city until the plan in my mind was at least a plan and not just a thought. The next morning I sent a text out to my chums asking if everyone minded meeting up for dinner tonight. We had been running around so much together, I wanted to give them some personal time, but I think this was important enough to need a real meeting. I got an agreement and it was settled. But first in the morning I reached out and set up a meeting like Wakako asked. To my slight discomfort, the meeting place was the dojo once again. Hayato had agreed to a meeting and so I headed over. I pulled my Kusanagi up onto the sidewalk in front of the dojo, noticing there were plenty of other bikes parked together. I stepped out and adjusted my holster, mostly just to make sure my guns and knife were still in place. As I walked in, I glanced at the spot where Musashi had died, but not even a blood stain remained. Stepping inside, I found no trouble, which I had almost expected, but as I entered the main room, I did see Hayato, but before that I saw Sensei. His focus shot to me the moment I stepped inside, and there was something in his eyes. For once, he didn't just point and demand, but actually walked over and approached me as I entered. Kusanagi. A moment. He requested, and it really was a request. I nodded, and he stalked off, back into the office section of the dojo, and I walked with him into what was obviously his business office. He didn't speak at first, instead holding himself solidly and then turning to face me. The attack on you at this dojo was unacceptable. While I was not able to defend you at the time, I have spoken my displeasure, but that means little to you. This place is meant to be a secure location. The sanctity of my dojo was broken. Then he bowed low and I realized he was being serious. It wasn't your fault. I argued, but I knew that just that wouldn't be enough. I accept your apology, Sensei. You've treated me well. I won't hold this issue against you. You will always be welcome here, Kusanagi. He said, and I nodded, getting the feeling he wasn't talking about just coming to train. This was a sort of hideout for the tiger claws as well, after all. With that concluded, I headed back out to finish my actual meetup. To my surprise, Hayato wasn't suited up. When I found her, she was sitting in the main dojo room on a chair that wasn't usually there. In a full kimono. Yukata? One of those. She looked like an actual Japanese princess, if I was honest. Although the chrome of her Kerenzikov stuck out and gave her a cyberpunk feel. I approved and threw her a thumbs up. You look awesome like that. I told her as I approached, and her mouth had been half open as she was about to speak, sort of flapped as she took in what I said and seemingly had no response. What? No. No nonsense right now. Silly fool, Widoi Motoko. She started rambling before shaking herself and stating my name in a serious matter. Hayato. I instead greeted her with a wave of my hand and a big smile that had her once more breaking her serious character for half a second before firming up and glaring. Motoko. I'm trying to be serious. Sit. She demanded and pointed at another chair beside her. I laughed instead and walked over to sit. Sorry. What's got you so serious, Hayato? I need to hire you to kill someone. Sure, who? I blinked as she blinked. Her face cracked once more as she seemed to have no idea how to respond. How are you so calm? I just asked you to flatline someone. Yeah? I do that for a living, Hayato. I'd be weird if I wasn't comfortable with it. You. She eventually decided on and glared before calming, closing her eyes and breathing in and out rapidly, which I assumed was meant to be calming breaths. I thank you for accepting. This is important, and I don't like having to ask a chum for this. She added. And I did my best not to snicker, because that sounded like something she had practiced saying so she could get it right. If you can't ask your chum to flatline someone for you, are you really friends? I asked jokingly, but Hayato just looked blank as her mouth fell open as she once again seemed to fail to find the words. I should probably stop teasing her. Okay, hold on. I'll stop being so casual about this. I'll accept it provisionally. I don't really care much about the eddies, but Hiromi will literally flay me alive with her words if I don't mention payment and stuff. But we can worry about that after. I added as Hayato seemed to pick up on that and looked ready to speak again. Who do you need killed? Kaneda Tsukamura. She said with almost a hiss, saying his name with more real anger than I've ever heard. He is one of my potential fiancés. She admitted and I blinked because wow. Wasn't expecting that. She noticed my shock. He has done something I can't forgive. She added after a moment. You don't need to make any reasons to me, Hayato. I said after a moment. I'm a merc. I kill people for a living. If you want him dead because he smells, then that's a good enough reason for me to kill him. I explained, and the idea made her snort into a rapid-fire giggle before she realized what she was doing and gained control of herself. Then, that is it? She questioned, and I smiled, because this was definitely the first time she had ever ordered someone's assassination. That's pretty much it. Other than payment stuff, but bleg. I stuck my tongue out at that. But any information you can give me will make it easier. Where does he hang out? A picture of him would help a lot. I explained, and she nodded, her eyes flashed, and suddenly I received a package. A very familiar style of information packet. Wakiko's work. Yes. Grandmother helped me put this together. How did you know? The way the information is structured is her style. It's a good thing. Wakiko's gig info packets are pretty clear. I explained, and that had the girl relax. I took a moment to look over the information and whistle. He's a big shot, all right. He is. She added after a moment with a disgusted look. I spoke with grandmother, and I want this done without any question as to what this was. I need everyone to know that it was me that caused his death. That's complicated. You realize that doing it that blatantly will make people look at me? Do not worry about that. If he is dead, I will make sure it is known that it was my hand that called for his death. She said, and I looked at her. And smirked a bit because she was once more saying something she had practiced. She noticed and looked away with a glare, but it made me laugh regardless. Okay. Then Hayato Nakagawa, you've hired yourself an assassin. I confirmed for her, and she looked surprised at my words. This is actually going to be fun. I've never done a really blatant assassination before. I think it'll be a good thing for me, actually. Maybe I'll finally convince the Tiger Claw goons to stop poking me if I prove I can eviscerate them. I wondered, and Hayato did a little scoff laugh. I believe that no matter what you do, someone will still think they can poke you. She said with a grumble that told me she had experience with this. Fair enough. Any particular death you want for this guy? Gun, blade, bomb? I asked, and she flinched at the question that apparently came out of nowhere. Whatever you think is best. Okay. I'll figure out something with a statement then. I assured her, and she nodded. Then she got quiet like she didn't know what to say. Want to be involved in the whole thing? I asked suddenly, and she jerked like I had struck her. What? You mean? Well, I'll be calling in my chums to get this done. Everything is easier with a crew, and it'll probably be an all-day thing before we get everything locked down. So, do you want to come with? She blinked, and then her head surprisingly slowly nodded up and down. Yes. Preem. Come on. I was already planning on meeting up with everyone for dinner, but for a gig that changes things a bit. Sorry about calling you all in early. As I said, we got a surprise gig offer. I said as Ichi and Malcolm both arrived first. We were at my apartment, since I didn't think I would need to do much net running since Hayato knew where the guy's house was. No problem. I was just hanging out with the folks today. Malcolm offered, and Ichi shrugged. I was going to mow the grass. I paid some kid up the street to do it instead. So I can't complain either. They both offered, and then as they came around they noticed my third guest. Hayato was sitting a little stiffly on the couch, still in her fancy kimono. The fact there was a Tiger Claw guy in the corner that I had kindly offered a seat to when I realized he was going to just stand there was the next thing they noticed. Motoko? Right. So meet Hayato. She's our client for this gig, and a friend of mine. We punch each other. I explained happily, and the two boys looked at each other before shrugging at my statement. What Motoko means is that she is my sparring partner. Hayato cut in, in a rush of speech before slowing as she realized what she had done. Makes sense. Motoko is a gorilla. Malcolm offered, and I scoffed at his words, and watched as he came in and settled on the couch without a care. I'm Malcolm, and that one is Ichi. Nice to meet you. He greeted Hayato with feigned casualness. Hayato Nakagawa. She greeted, and Malcolm twitched and practically jumped off the couch in shock like he had just been burned. Holy fuck, you're the Tiger Princess, Malcolm. Language. This is our client. I grumbled, and he looked at me and then at Hayato, who wasn't looking very comfortable. How do you even know her, Motoko? Why didn't you tell us you know Hayato Nakagawa? The second. Malcolm, you say her name like I should just know anything about what that means. I only found out she was important during the whole kidnapping attempt. I waved it off, and then Ichi was there beside me. Hiromi is going to kill you for never explaining you knew Hayato Nakagawa. He whispered to me, and while I felt an uncomfortable premonition go down my spine, I still jabbed his ribs a bit. It's just Hayato. Stop saying her name like she's a thing. I whispered to them, and then looked to Hayato. Don't mind these gonks, they act like morons, but are actually surprisingly competent. I said, lying through my teeth, which I happily noticed both boys had picked up on and threw me a betrayed look. I see. Anyway. To business. Hayato needs someone killed. I explained, and she did sort of wince at my blunt statement, but a moment later the boys nodded at that. Well, that's something Motoko can do. Ichi whispered, and then Hiromi entered the apartment. Hey, I'm here. We have a client. Hiromi asked, looking excited but keeping her pace and speech calm as she entered. Yep. Hayato needs someone killed. I explained once more, being blunt about it. Section 9 specializes in asset removal. Hiromi said, as she settled onto the couch near Hayato, and to my amusement offered her a card. Have no fear, we will ensure complete customer satisfaction for your needs. Hayato took the card almost without realizing it and then blinked as she looked it over, and then at me. Section 9 is our Merc company. Hiromi is our corpo, don't mind her corporate speech, it's just how she is. Rude. Hiromi whispered under her breath, and I flashed her a smile in apology. Very well. Hayato added, still looking a little confused. But then she straightened up. I understand that you are the one Motoko said would handle payment? That's me. Hiromi said cheerfully, and then pulled out a shard and handed it over. And here is our pricing and plan structure. She said just as cheerfully, and I rolled my eyes as Hayato now looked a little uncomfortable. I walked over and bent near Hiromi's ear and made a little cough. Friendship discount. I whispered and then moved over towards the boys. Both of them looked to Hayato, to me, and then to Hiromi. Hiromi has no idea who she is talking to, does she? Malcolm whispered to me, and I shook my head. No. Why would she? You realize, no, you know what? It's better this way. Malcolm said, smiling as he turned his attention back to Hayato and Hiromi hashing out things. To my surprise, while Hayato had looked uncomfortable at first, she was easily keeping up with Hiromi and arguing back just as easily. They were getting along surprisingly well.